Hey guys, welcome back. Today, I've got a lecture for you on how to make sustainable progress in your exercise program. All right, this is going to be a really helpful lecture, not just for beginners, but people who've been working out for months and years. An important question that's going to come up at some point is, how do I keep making progress without constantly running into a wall and having plateaus on various exercises? Regardless of things like bulking and cutting and sleep, how do I train in a way that allows me to consistently accumulate some weight, some reps, feel good, not sacrifice technique, not get injured? And those are all really important things to consider. So, as a beginner, you're not too worried about sustainable progress. You can go in and you can add 5 pounds to your bench press every week or every couple of weeks. You can add 5 pounds to your squat every week. You're hitting rep PRs all the time. You're going from 7 reps with a given weight to doing 8, then 9, session to session, or at least every couple of sessions. And that feels really good. It's really motivational to see that kind of change on a session to session, week to week basis. And so motivation and discipline, maybe that's an important component for beginners, right? To get them to stick it out. But I would say once they're in for a few weeks and they start seeing those gains, that's going to keep them going for a while. And if they get through that initial barrier of being a forever novice, right? Program hopping or arguing in comment sections over what exercises are best, getting discouraged because they think they're too skinny or too fat or too this or too that, whatever. Once you get them training, now you need to make sure they keep training. And one of the ways to do that is encourage them to slow down, not go for so many 1-rep maxes and so many big heavy PRs. Take your time and make your progress sustainable. So this is a super important lecture to stop you from getting discouraged as your progress begins to slow down, which is just a natural part of the course of training, right? You don't have unlimited genetic potential. I'm not saying there's a hard natural limit for everyone, but the truth is this. Your first few years of training, whether that's 2, 3, 4, 5 years of training, you're going to blow through a lot of PRs constantly. And the next 5 to 10 years are going to be a lot slower than that. And even after your first year or two, it's even going to be more substantially slower in year 3 and 4. So you need to be mentally prepared for that. And I want to arm you guys with tools to be adequately equipped to do that task. Okay, let's jump right into it. So there's really 4 categories of information that I want you guys to think about. They are talking about creating a scheme of some kind, right? Some sort of progression scheme, some sort of plan, some sort of way in which you tell yourself, I'm ready for more reps, more weight, more sets, whatever it is. It's some way that you prove to yourself you're ready to work harder than your previous workouts, and you structure it out in a way where it's predictable and it's based on weeks, it's based on sessions, it lasts for a period of time, and so on. And then after that, we're going to talk about 2 very interesting concepts that I want you guys to get a grasp of, because it will change the way you approach your training to stop you from hitting plateaus. It's so important, and that is called total volume and tonnage. These are 2 perspectives of ways of looking at, with really basic calculations, looking at how hard you're working in a given workout, so that way you can test to see if in July you're working harder than June, and if in August you're actually working harder than July. Things like that. Then we're going to look at PRs, how to hit them, why to hit them, how frequently to hit them, why you shouldn't get too greedy. So hit PRs, don't be greedy. And then we're going to talk about another very interesting concept called micro-progressions, which is basically just, in short, making small progressions so that way you don't bite off more than you can chew when you try and work harder. All right. So with regards to creating a scheme, what I mean by this is that you need some sort of plan where you think to yourself, okay, every 2 sessions, I'll try and add 5 pounds within a given rep range or to a fixed rep range for my squat. And what that might look like is you plan to do, let's say in a fixed rep range, you could do 3 sets of 6 paused high bar back squats with 250. And if you train it on Monday and Thursday, then the following Monday, you're going to add 5 pounds and still try and do a couple, 3 sets of 6. You're going to try and complete it. Now, if you don't have a fixed rep range, what that might look like is 6 to 8. So you might stick to it you might stick to that weight and try and just add a rep every session until you get to 8. And 8 is the trigger that tells you you're ready for the next 5 pounds. So Monday, week 1 might be 250, 6, 6, and 6 of your 3 sets. Then Thursday, 250, 7, 7, 7. And then the next Monday, 250, 8, 8, 8. That's your trigger. It tells you you're ready for 5 more pounds. So Thursday of the second week, you go up to 255 for 6, 6, and 6, ideally. Now, that's going to work really, really well as a beginner, and even to some degree as an intermediate, especially if you get good at estimating your rate of perceived exertion, right? RPE, right?
Never push yourself hard, deload and be careful, and oh my goodness, periodization and overload, and yeah, let's throw a bunch of big words, hypertrophy, and yeah, go to the friggin' gym and train hard.
Or reps in reserve. In other words, submaximal strength training where you say to yourself, I think I probably could have done 2 or even 3 more reps, so I can stick to this weight and it's not going to crush me. I'm not going to die. I'm not going to pass out. I'm not going to fail a rep because failing reps sucks. It's demoralizing. It makes you a little bit more injury prone. It's not that dangerous to fail a rep, even a squat, right? It looks scary, but it's not as dangerous as you think. But in general, you should spend more time completing reps than failing reps. So one of the things you'll encounter as you become more advanced, more intermediate, more advanced, is that when you plan aggressive progressions like, oh, add a rep or add 5 pounds, you have to slow it down in a way where on those given sets, you need to decrease your proximity to failure. Because sure, as a beginner, you can add a true 1 rep of strength per set per workout, but because your strength gains decrease over time, you're not going to be able to do that. So the only way you're going to be able to add 3 reps across 3 sets for a fixed weight for a given workout is to have multiple in reserve. And then you spend those reserve reps. It's like spending your money, right? You got to spend it wisely. It's your life savings. Okay, you're not going to spend all your reserve reps and then fail the last rep of the 3rd set. So you got to get thinking about things like that. But the big picture point is this. No matter what your particular progression scheme looks like, regardless of whether you train 5x5 or some kind of rep range where here's the least amount of reps you're allowed to do, here's the cap. When you hit the cap, you go back down to the bottom. You facilitate that by adding a small amount of weight. So natural hypertrophy might call that an evolving rep range, whatever. Either way, whatever your particular progression scheme is, you need to stick to it, a given rep scheme for a given exercise for probably multiple months at a time. I would suggest at least 3 or 4 months, if not 6 months, and if possible, 8 months to a year. You don't have to, but look, if you're just going to do 1 rep scheme for like a month, you're kind of flip-flopping a lot if every month or every week you're doing like sets of 5 and now you're sporadically doing sets of 12 and now you're thinking, okay, I'm finally going to do 5x5, then you give up on that after 3 weeks and then you're jumping all over the place. It's going to make it hard for you to consistently make progress. It's okay to have peaks and valleys, ebb and flow. That's normal in a workout program. What's not normal is going up and then down and then across and then up and then down, down, down and then across and then up, way up and then across. No, you can't jump all over the place, okay? And if you calculated your tonnages, theoretically you could make progress switching progression schemes all the time if you gave it your best effort, trained close to failure, 3 sets, write it down, calculate your tonnage, and so on. But it's not ideal, so we're not going to do that. We're going to stick to things for months at a time. Manipulating the reps and the weight is foolproof. What do I mean by that? Well, some people would call that double progression. It's what we talked about earlier in that squat example, 250, now it's 255. 6 reps goes up to 8, then you switch. Basically, you can't just stick to one or the other for the rest of your life and reap all the benefits of the diverse ways of training. So 5x5 is good. I suppose you could stick to it for life, but if you never manipulate the reps and try a set of 10 on bench or a single where it moves really fast or a set of 3, you're going to be missing out on some benefits. And on the heavier side, some of that will be neurological, technique. Maybe there truly is such a thing as a strength training rep range. I'm not necessarily convinced that there is, but let's say there is. You're going to get used to that benefit. Your soft tissues are probably going to adapt to heavy things from doing really heavy things periodically at least. And then on the higher rep range side, maybe there's a metabolic benefit. Maybe because the tonnage is higher, you accumulate more hypertrophy per given session. And so if you stick to fixed rate reps forever, maybe not in your best interest. And the same is true for weight. You don't want to only bench 120 pounds for the rest of your life and just add up a gazillion reps. That doesn't make a lot of sense. So manipulating both the reps and the weight over time is a foolproof way to have a progression scheme, regardless of how you accomplish that. All right. Now, we already talked about fixed rep schemes a little bit, but they require reps in reserve. You can only handle a weight for 3 sets of 5 or 5 sets of 5 if on the first set, that particular weight on that particular day is not your 5 RM. By definition, a 5 RM, rep max, is something you can only do 5 times once on a given day.
So your 5 RM by definition is that something you could do for 5 once, and that's it.
That's it. So if you do it 5 and it's all out, you might get 4 and get partway up on that 5th one, but you're not getting 5 again. Otherwise, it's not a 5 rep max. So in order to complete the same number of reps with the same weight, multiple sets, you need to have reps in reserve. And the amount of reps in reserve is almost proportional to how many sets you want to do that weight at. So down here in this deadlift, we'll get to this later. You see how there's fixed weights for 2 sets, and then for the back off sets, it's fixed weights for 2. Well, if you're doing 2 sets of 5, that means on the first one, you probably need 1 in reserve. But if you're doing 3 sets of 5, you might need 2 or a really long rest before that 3rd set. With any program, with any progression scheme, it slowing down is inevitable. This is one of the good reasons why when you make a program and popular programs out there, they don't last forever, right? Because your program is going to slow down. A program typically, and they don't always, but they usually do, they have a progression rate that's fixed for a period of time. So you might be adding 5 pounds per week for 10 weeks. You might be adding 10 pounds every month for 3 months, right? Or 4 months. And what's beneficial about that is by the end of it, you're grinding to get those progressions. Why? Your body is naturally losing its ability to keep up with that particular rate of progress. And this is why you can make programs that are more geared towards beginners and intermediates. But with slight modification, you can really make any program for anyone with just manipulating a few variables. It's not rocket science to train exercise long term. But the point is this: you're not going to be able to infinitely add 10 pounds to your deadlift every month. Sorry, fellas, it's not going to work that way. You can add it to your deadlift for a period of time, but eventually it will cost you too much of your reserve energy, your technique, your joints are going to get beat up. You need to take a break. You need to slow down. At some point, 5 pounds per month is really good. Okay, so the slowdown is inevitable. Then you should also plan your numbers pre-session. So going into a workout, roughly speaking, you should plan or have a really good idea how many reps you're going to do, how many sets, and what weights you're going to use. You don't just go in there and figure it out and guess and, hey, let's try this today. You need to have a plan. So plan your numbers. It's okay if you miss some numbers or you're feeling really good some days and you bang out an extra rep. That's cool. You do that. But either way, you need to have a pretty good idea. And even I would suggest having it on paper or in your phone before you go into your session. That's a great way to do it. Okay, now deloads are beneficial, but not 100% necessary. So what you should consider there is if you're focused on lifting heavy more frequently and on the compound movements, especially the competition lifts, back squats, deadlifts, bench presses, you're going to need to take a break eventually for the sake of your joints. That might mean 1 week, that might mean 1 session, that might mean 3 weeks if you feel really beat up, and then just do some light weights and build your way back up into your previous program with maybe a different rate of progression. But either way, you can't just linearly add weight, especially to heavy exercises, forever. And I'm not convinced that deloads do this whole resensitization, blah, blah, blah. Look, you're resensitizing because you were lifting baby weights for a couple of weeks and now you're ready to go. But because you got less work done, the fact that you can handle more work now is not an obvious difference in net gains. Either way, deloads work just fine. But if you rest often enough and do few enough sets or have a low enough proximity to failure, you probably won't need to deload very often or at all, except maybe those competition lifts. Yeah, the deloads are pretty useful, not gonna lie. Okay, that wraps that up. Now moving on to the next subject, total volume and tonnage being the drivers of exercise progress. For these bad boys, we're going to talk about the total volume perspective first, and we're going to look at pull-ups as an example, and then we're going to get into calculated tonnage as it would be applied to a deadlift session. For the total volume perspective, what I mean to say is this. In your workout, whether you use one weight level for all your sets for an exercise, or whether you use different weight levels, you can add up all the reps with those different weight levels or the same weight level, and you can tell yourself, I did this many reps total with this weight, and so next time if I do 2 or 3 more, that's a volume progression. That's a great way to do it because it allows you to split up the work into really as many sets as you want. You can go from 3 to 5. If the total number of reps with a given weight goes up, that's a progression. You don't necessarily need to hammer out things to failure. Even on isolations, you don't have to go to failure to grow.
There is no point, at least from what I think, to not go to failure.
But especially compound movements, heavy things, things that are technical, volume being the means of progression rather than proximity to failure, that's a great way to look at it. It works for isolations too, by the way, so if that's controversial among people who call themselves bodybuilders, that's fine. I'm willing to take some flack and criticism. I'm right, they're wrong. All right, so for a pull-ups workout, what a good example might look like is this. There's 5 sets in this particular workout. For the first 2 sets, this person is training with 20 pounds weighted. So the weight is their body weight plus 20 pounds for 5 reps on the first set and 5 on the second set. Then for the last 3 sets, this individual did body weight pull-ups for the last 3 sets, and they did 12, 10, and 10. So the way that you would calculate, it's barely a calculation, guys. I'm not a mathematician by any means, and maybe you're not either. That's fine. But the total volume perspective is this. You add up all the reps for each given weight level, and then that tells you the total volume for the given weight level. So there's 10 reps total at the resistance level of body weight plus 20. That's what the first 2 sets were. And on the last 3, the total volume perspective is 32 reps because there was 12, then 10, then 10. 20 plus 12 is 32. There's 32 reps body weight. So when this individual goes to train next time, they could get this 32 to 34. They could get this 10 to 11 and not even necessarily manipulate the 3 lighter, you could call them back off sets. That's your total volume perspective for that particular pull-ups workout. You can do this for other exercises, and I definitely recommend doing this for weighted calisthenics or calisthenics in general, since your body weight's fluctuating. So sure, you can look at it with tonnage, but this is a little bit more caveman, a little bit simple. The calculated tonnage is only a couple steps more, and it's not really that hard to calculate. So let's take a look at this deadlift workout. 4 sets. And there's a fixed weight for the first 2 and a fixed weight for the last 2, different levels. So what they did here on set 1 and 2 was 250 pounds for 6 and 6. Then for set 3 and 4, called a back off set, 185 for 9 and 8 respectively. When you add this up, what you get is this great big number. And this number shouldn't mean much to you other than it's a calculation of the total number of pounds you lift, which is a strange way to look at it, but it's helpful in the sense that these pounds represent labor, right? Physical work. So if this number goes up, the amount of work that we do is going up. That means we're progressing. Great. Awesome. Got that? So literally in your calculator, all you would do is just add up the number of reps for a given weight, calculate that, or multiply that number by the weight level used for each of the weight levels, and then there you go. So 12 times 250, that's 3,000. 17 is what you get when you add 8 to 9. So 17 times 185 is 3,145. No, I didn't do that in my head. I used a calculator off camera a moment ago. And that gives you 6,145 pounds. That's the total calculated tonnage for that particular deadlift workout, my friends. And that's it. They're both foolproof ways to measure how hard you're working. I would definitely not suggest doing these calculations every single workout. You'll get good at looking at it and just seeing what your sets were and go, yeah, that's harder. because you just know, roughly speaking, that a couple reps here and there with similar weights or the same weights are harder. You just know that intuitively with subconscious head math. You don't necessarily have to whip out a calculator, but certainly by the end of a month or a couple months or every couple weeks, especially as you become more uncertain about your progress, oh, I'm stalling, I'm hitting a plateau. Well, it's time for you to break out the calculator and find out what would be a manageable way to manipulate the tonnages and the total volume. A simple way is this: add 5 pounds to these top 2 sets, 255 times 6 and times 6. That would only be adding 60 pounds worth of tonnage total between that, because extra 5 pounds times 6 is 30, times 2 sets is 60. That would only be a very small progression, and as long as you have enough reps in reserve to perform those with good technique, it's a deadlift, that's a reasonable way to make progress. That's a very sustainable way to make progress. Adding that rep to 250 is actually going to beat you up quite a bit if you don't have a lot of reps in reserve. So adding reps to heavy weights, low numbers of reps, be conscious about adding a rep to a workout where the reps are well below 10. Okay, it's going to take a lot out of you. But that's really it. Don't overthink this stuff. Take a picture of it. Try this out. It's a very reliable way for you guys to make session to session, week to week, month to month progress. Okay, so hit PRs, but don't get greedy, fellas. So secure a PR first and then be content. If you hit a 5-pound PR on bench or a 10-pound PR on squat, you don't have to spend your reserve energy and go like, wow, that was easy, I'm going to do the next one. I mean, if it's really easy, try just 5 pounds more. Don't try 10 pounds more, okay? You don't have to test yourself. You get strong and you get big by training and not testing. And when you do 5 RMs and 3 RMs and AMRAPs with a fixed given weight, that just means doing as many reps as you can, or doing a 1-rep max or heavy single, whatever. It's going to take a lot out of you. So that's just testing your strength. That's not building your strength. It's adding joint fatigue and stress unnecessarily. So we'll get to it later, but you don't need to just constantly hit PRs and grind yourself into the ground to prove how strong you are. Instead, train and you will get stronger and bigger. So hit a PR, secure it, and be content. Technique matters more than the number on the bar, fellas. Okay, if you can't hit a rep or weight PR, just push tonnage. So if you somehow manage not to do more reps with any fixed particular weight, or somehow you can't add like 5 pounds to this deadlift and do it for more, what you could simply do is just get a little more volume with an extra set, thereby increasing tonnage. That could be as simple as 150 for a set of 5, fellas. That's a lot more tonnage all of a sudden. Now, you don't need to do very much. You could even do a 5th set with a couple reps at 200. Now you're accumulating tonnage. And as long as that's below your maximal recoverable volume and above your minimum effective volume, you will make progress if you're eating calories and sleeping. It's that simple. So if you're having a hard time hitting rep and weight PRs and you're nervous, you're thinking I hit a plateau, just find some way to push your tonnage or total volume. Use the calculator as insurance. So when you go to hit a PR, whether it's you're going to overhead press 120 for as many reps as possible, or you're going to try and hit a 225 bench for the first time for a single, whatever it is, use a calculator as insurance. So a good example would be, oh, okay, based on this really hard set of 5 that I did the other day, what is my projected 1-rep max? Oh, great. That number is 5, 10 pounds or 2 or 3 pounds above the PR I want to hit. So that means I'm relatively safe, right? Some days we're a little bit weaker, we're a little bit more woken up, caffeine, food, sleep, whatever. You're not always feeling 100%, and some days you feel 110%, right? But the calculator allows you to have an insurance policy. So even if you're not feeling great, shave those 5 or 10 pounds mostly off, guess what? You're still strong enough to hit the number that you wanted. All right, be happy with small PRs or wait for some big ones. You don't have to go out of your way to go off program to prove to yourself how strong you are. You can wait. You can wait 6 months to a year before you hit some big 1-rep max. And that's really the crux of it, guys. That's one of the takeaway messages. Waiting and being patient is so healthy for your body and also your mind. As those PRs slow down, you're going to start to miss them. So become content with more and more infrequent tests of your strength. Heavy PRs must be infrequent. That's just the nature of lifting really, really heavy, near maximal things. So if it's a 1-rep max, 3-rep max especially, something like a deadlift or a squat, you're going to feel beat up in your joints after doing it. It's going to be that way. That doesn't mean you're going to get injured every time, or even if you do, it doesn't necessarily mean it's a grade 2 tear. But if you go out of your way to do a 1 rep max on every exercise every month or every 2 weeks, oh boy, you're going to feel it, and you're going to get miserable, and you're going to get sick of training and not seeing jumps on it every single time you do that. So you need to slow down. You need to put your foot on the brakes for a second, kiddo. All right. Best to wait weeks or even months. That's self-explanatory. Technique must be on point. If not, why are you going to bother? If your technique is not solid, when you go to hit a PR, or even just simply week-to-week progressions, right? Adding a rep to those sets. If the technique's not on point, why bother? You're not ready for it. Stall variations are not the problem, it's you. There's really no such thing as a variation that runs out of, benefits. Oh, you've done a back squat until you got to 315 or 350 or 405. Well, that's it. Now you need to switch to front squats. No, you don't. You can, and that has benefits, but it also has cons, right? Pros and cons, costs and benefits. You can progress basically any exercise for a really, really long time, possibly even indefinitely. Reasons why you give up on it have more to do with you than that particular exercise. I love variations. I think they're great. Competition lifts do beat you up quite a bit, especially as you get stronger and stronger. So you have to manage that with days between sessions, reps in reserve, technique, and so on. But just because as you get stronger, those lifts take more and more out of your joints, guess what? Your joints get stronger. So as long as you're humble and you slow yourself down, you don't necessarily have to give up on competition bench or competition squat or deadlift. You just have to learn to manage it. All right, but wait, what exactly is a PR? Well, I don't know. I guess you can get really liberal with the definition of PR and say, I did 135 OHP for 3 sets of 5. That's a 3-set PR for a set of 5. Yeah, sure. You can call that a PR if you want. Write it down in your book. It's up to you, man. But I usually look at PRs on a set-per-set basis. So what's the heaviest thing you ever done 5 reps with, 8 reps with, 10 reps with, or with a particular weight? Look at dumbbell curls, right? With 35 pounds, what's the most reps you've ever done? Oh, you increased it? That's a PR. Things like that, right? Really simple stuff. Don't overthink that. Now, last point, micro progressions. 2.5, 1.25, 1.0, 0.5 fractional plates are all a must-have addition to your arsenal long-term. If you're working out in a gym, go out of your way to snag those little tiny plates, especially the 2.5s. They might not have 1 pound and 0.5 plates, but if you can get those for your home gym, that's great. You definitely should, especially for things like barbell curls, overhead presses, bench presses. Those 0.5s and 1s and 1.25s will really come in handy for, let's say 5x5, you just throw 0.5 on each side. Well, it's 1 pound more. Doesn't sound like a lot, but if you're progressing 4 times slower than you used to as a beginner, well, then you're going to need to make progressions that are perhaps 4 times smaller, right? That just makes intuitive sense. So pick these things up. They're a great addition to your collection, and they will allow you to make sustainable progress. All right, if doing calisthenics, your body weight's a PR. So if you gain 5 pounds from bulking, I don't care what anyone says about bulking. Yes, I know it makes you stronger. Yes, I know being in a calorie surplus and being fatter makes you stronger. Would never disagree with that. But if you're 165 instead of 160 and you added 5 pounds onto your pull-up PR, as far as I'm concerned, that's a 10-pound PR. And you should look at it that way too. Double progression is great, but volume is reliable. That's what we talked about earlier, where if you can't push weight and reps, you push tonnage. You can plan progressions, but the time frame will change. So again, like we talked about with programs don't really have an expiry date. It's just that your rate of progression is naturally slowing down, whereas any given program, it typically is fixed. That's why you need to switch programs or modify programs. It's not that they stop working entirely, it's just that a few variables need to be tweaked. You can, be prepared to prioritize one lift over another, especially as you get stronger. You can't maximally improve your overhead press and bench press at the same time. Same is true for squat and deadlift. Same is true for barbell rows and weighted pull-ups, right? Wherever you see exercises that share resources, those resources have to be allocated to both, and therefore you can't get the most out of each by doing both all out heavy as possible, as much as possible, all the time. You have to sort of choose one to prioritize over another, perhaps for a period of time. Now, you can progress both at the same time, but the progression must be slower. So if you're content with that, that's fine. You don't have to periodize your program in a way where, okay, here's my squat phase, then I switch to my deadlift phase, and I squat half as often, now it's deadlifting half as often. You don't have to think about it even that hard, but look, guys, you can't get everything you want all out all the time at once. Okay, you need to prioritize some things. That's a beneficial way to look at it. But again, if you go all out on everything all the time, be prepared for tinier amounts of progress. And this is the last point. Reps in reserve can be spent, but spend them wisely. That goes back here. Look, if you're going to add a rep to a set, sometimes you're not strong enough for a full extra rep. You might shave off half of your reserve rep or shave off an entire reserve rep just to push tonnage, but you need to spend these things wisely. It's in reserve as a safety net and also to allow you to do more sets with that weight, ideally for a similar or the same amount of reps, but you can spend them. So when you spend your reserve energy, use it wisely. Otherwise, that's really all I've got for you guys today. I know that's a longer lecture than normal, but you know what? This is a really important one to help you guys chug along through the months and years of training, whether it's compound lifts for strength or hypertrophy. If you're listening to this thinking, wow, he's talking about strength training, guys, these principles apply to hypertrophy too, just as much. You need to accumulate tonnage. You need to push volume in order to grow your muscles. Okay, this isn't just about powerlifting. This applies to you too. That's all I've got. So thanks so much for joining, and I'll see you guys next time.